This has been an extraordinary year filled with too many stresses to count. It's important to your health and to those around you to check in with yourself and others to make sure everyone is okay. This holiday season can be especially stressful, but remember that you don't have to go through any of this alone. There are folks who support you and want to see you okay so that we all come out on the other side of this together. Don't forget that, and don't be afraid to speak up if you need a hand. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. This week, I'm talking about 25 years of brewing and lessons learned with Hugh Sisson, the founder of Heavy Seas Brewing in Baltimore. From recipe evolution to distributor decisions, along with an affinity for cask ale, and while he still stays connected to consumers, we'll get into it all. Up first, though, Sean Sasser is the director of brewing at Cigar City, which is this episode's sponsor, and we're talking everybody's favorite native of your state, Sean, Florida Man. And it's a double IPA, and I'm curious as to why you've seen success in the double IPA category and how Florida Man fits into that.
Well, I think people have really come around to double IPAs because, as opposed to before, when it was just a higher ABV and that usually meant more malty, there's a lot more hops and a lot more drinkability in these double IPAs these days. So you're getting more of a bang for your buck. And Florida Man definitely fits into that with the amount of hops that we put into it and the yeast and hop expression. It's definitely you get your money's worth.
So tell us, what hops are you using? You mentioned yeast, so let's get into that a little bit as well.
Sure. So we are using London 3 as our yeast, and we're using a blend of Citra, Azacca, and El Dorado as our hops.
And as far as flavor profiles go, when you crack one open, what can we expect?
So first off, you're going to get a big hit of pineapple, followed by a little bit of mango rind, and then some tangerine. Definitely a lot of citrus notes. It's not very bitter despite its 50 IBUs, and it's definitely drinkable, with enough malt character to kind of back it up.
Sean will be back with us towards the end of the program, but I'll remind everybody that you should go to cigarcitybrewing.com where you can learn more about Florida Man and find out where you can get it near you. I'm both excited and bummed to have Hugh Sisson, the founder of Heavy Seas Beer, on the show today. I'm excited because Hugh is a thoughtful, engaging, and dynamic figure in beer who has worked tirelessly to foster and grow an industry and has been a mentor for many. I'm bummed because I had hoped to do this interview in person. But, COVID. And it's likely better to be apart because if I was at the brewery, I'd likely have one too many pints of IPA. Hugh has been in beer a lot longer than most, with Heavy Seas and a brewpub named Sissons before that. He and his dad successfully worked to get state legislation changed to make professional brewing easier in Maryland, and he continues to stay involved and to be an advocate for an industry he cares deeply about. This week, the brewery, officially licensed as Clipper City, but going under the Heavy Seas name, turns 25. It's an odd year to have a milestone birthday, but the brewery is continuing its tradition of releasing a big, boozy monster of an ale, and we'll talk about that as well on the show. Hugh's also looking forward to reopening the taproom when it's safe to do so. A few years back, when I was on a book tour, I did a signing at Heavy Seas for a few hours, and I watched as happy patrons came in for pints and a tour. Hugh led several of these tours himself, and would start off with a very specific reading. Since he hasn't had an audience for a while, I thought it would be good to let him stretch those muscles. Here's our conversation. I appreciate you doing this, and before we start, I wonder if you'd lead us in a prayer.
Oh, okay. Well, this is predicated on the fact that for me, beer has always been sort of a spiritual thing. Dear friends, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of malt, hops, water, and yeast. Let us pray. Our lager, which art in barrels, thou will be consumed at the Heavy Seas beer event. Give us this day our foamy heads, and forgive us our spillages, as we forgive those who spill against us. And lead us not into incarceration, hell no, but deliver us from hangovers. For thine is the beer, the foam, and the lace, forever and ever, barmen.
Well, thank you, Reverend.
You're welcome.
I remember taking the tour years ago, and you standing in front of a room of people who were just there to drink beer, who were giddy about taking a brewery tour, and this must be a decade ago, if not more, at this point.
Right.
And you belting that out to the shock and amusement, and then just general, I guess, enthusiasm for all the folks taking a brewery tour. You all haven't done those in a good little bit, I
No,
imagine.
we haven't done brewery tours since March, with the advent of COVID chaos. For us, we closed our tap room, and that hasn't been open either. 90+% of our business is to wholesalers, and we needed to do everything we could to not have traffic coming in and out of the building, to minimize that, to lower exposure for our production staff, because if they go down, we have a heap of hurt.
Yeah. So 90% is going out the door. Did you
95?
Okay. Did you see a change in consumer habits in those first couple of months?
Hell yeah, and they're continuing. Cans were emerging anyway, but the can business has completely blown up, which is also now beginning to trigger all of this aluminum can shortage. But so the can business completely blew up. Our larger format packages, 12 packs, and especially 12-pack mix packs, sampler packs, blew up. And of course, they are the most labor-intensive packages that we have. So yeah, so we kind of got caught a little bit flat-footed. I don't think we were alone vis-a-vis our peers.
Mm-hmm.
And we struggled, frankly, during some of the the peak season in June, July, and August, trying to keep up with those packages, just because it just blew up. Didn't see that one coming.
And as far as what people were buying, though, was it? Mm-hmm. I heard from a lot of brewers of your size and with regional scope, the larger the pack, the better.
Yes.
But did you see a change in what people were buying? Were they buying more session beers? Were they thinking heavier to get through the hard times? What was?
There was not so much a shift to either lighter beers or heavier beers. Definitely, there was a shift to the larger format 12 packs as opposed to 6 packs. The interesting thing that I don't think I'm alone in seeing this, though, is that there seems to be a little bit of a consumer return to core, as opposed to the throwing the spaghetti against the wall. And I think that has to do with the fact that you're spending whatever you're spending to buy a 6-pack or a 12-pack of beer, and in these uncertain times, people are kind of saying, well, I know that's good, so our Loose Cannon and the Bell's Two Hearted and clearly Sierra and New Belgium and Dogfish, etc., all benefited from that with our core brands, which in the year leading up to this had sort of been suffering a little bit because the focus was so much on innovation.
Yeah.
And the problem with innovation is, it's not tried and true. And I think as, people get a little spooked financially, et cetera, you're going to part with whatever you're parting with. You want to make sure it's good.
Have you, boy, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm trying to think of the right vein to mine. But when you're thinking about core beers, let's start there, because over the 25 years, and that's one of the reasons that we're speaking today, is because your brewery is about to celebrate a quarter century of being open and around. You've changed what the core beers have been. I think of some of the other breweries from your, that you're cut from the same cloth, where they've had, the same beers all along, and they've been, comfortable with that. But you've
Mm-hmm.
changed things up over the course of your 25 years. So
sure.
So what's core now versus what core was, or even what you hoped it would be early on?
When we started the company 25 years ago, and I think this was true across the board for craft brewers in general, from a marketing standpoint, all you had to be was not one of the macros.
Mm-hmm.
But the year that we opened the door, which was 95, the year that we did that is the year that all of a sudden craft beer went flat for the first wave.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, you couldn't, all this off the wall crazy stuff wasn't working in the market anymore. So we opened as Clipper City Brewing Company, and I quickly figured out that I wasn't going to be able to do the the river is a mile wide and an inch deep approach, where you ship beer to 40 states and you've got no market presence in any of them.
Sure, it worked for Rogue for a while, but yeah,
it worked for a whole lot of breweries for a long time, up until about 95, 96. But that wasn't going to happen. So all of a sudden, we needed to find a way to survive, pretty much shipping everything we were going to do within, a 150-mile radius of our location. Well, Baltimore was still pretty much a macro beer town at that stage. So I had to make my Clipper City brand be much more aligned with sort of more mainstream style beers. And we executed them well, but that's kind of what Clipper City began to mean. And then what happened was, about 2000, 2001, the craft market began to come back. And I came to the conclusion that from a marketing standpoint, we couldn't begin to market more exciting beers under the Clipper City brand, because that was already established with sort of one concept. So we created Heavy Seas as our brand for our more adventurous, higher ABV products, and rolled that out in 2001 or two. I can't remember the exact year now.
Right.
And then that was so successful that in 2010 we eliminated the Clipper City brand as a brand and focused everything under the name Heavy Seas. Our lead product in that was our IPA called Loose Cannon, which is a pretty well respected product.
Yeah.
And sort of like what Stone did, where they had Arrogant Bastard and Double Bastard and blah blah blah. We kind of made the Cannon Crew our focus. So we had Double Cannon, Loose Cannon. We introduced our citrus IPA a couple of years ago, Tropicannon, and we're adding a hazy version of it. We're rolling that out now. So the Cannon Crew really is our core, and that represents probably 80+% of our total volume, those 4 SKUs or four products.
Wow.
And then, but you still got to maintain a certain level of innovation. So we installed a 15-barrel brew house about 2 years ago, specifically so we could do new product development, test them in the tap room, and begin to get a little more excitement. Because the one thing that you need to do if you're in consumer products, unless for some reason you are just absolutely amazingly brilliant or absolutely amazingly lucky, is you need to be willing to reinvent yourself from time to time. So we went through a logo change in the last couple of years, and we're really working on a lot more innovation, which will start to drift in the course of 2021 and 2022.
I'm curious though, because there are customers who hate change, and there's certainly business owners who hate change.
Right.
But you've seen the benefit in this reinventing yourself as you've gone through this, right? I mean, it could have been easier to keep Clipper City. It could have been easy to,
Yeah, but if we stood on our laurels, I don't think that's the right way to say that. But if we had done that, you lose relevance. And whether your innovation is in terms of branding and marketing, or whether your innovation is in terms of product development, the other thing you got to keep in mind is that the 25 years ago, when 30 years ago, when all of this sort of began to occur, the target consumer was in their 20s. All right. Well, that same consumer who's made this industry an industry is now in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And you don't drink as much beer when you're in your 50s and 60s as you did when you were in your 20s. So if all we did was continue to do the same thing, eventually our core customer base is gonna stop drinking beer. So you have part of the innovation and part of the rebranding and the marketing has to be focused on that younger consumer, which the millennials are tough to read. So I think that's part of the driver there is that how do you stay relevant? And the only way I know to stay relevant is you keep throwing some spaghetti against the wall, and then when you find something that sticks, you just keep working on that.
I was talking with somebody recently, and we were kind of going back and forth on how the craft beer industry, what we're calling it now as craft beer, is really still in its adolescence in the grand scheme of things. And 40 years in, but even looking back, 30 plus years ago, you were working to change state laws in order to run a brewery, which, again, as far as this country and the timeline goes, is not all that long. And so, yeah. I guess I'm just sort of curious as to, it's just a good reminder as to what you were saying, though, of, innovation and trying to stay in it, because in so many ways, I think folks are still trying to discover themselves or what this industry is going to be. And, regardless of the machinations that are happening right now with hard seltzer and alternative beverages of all different stripes, I think beer is still trying to, it's still very young.
It's still very young, but it's kind of interesting because one of the things that's challenging but becoming, I think, more and more critical in the craft beer segment is the whole concept of innovation versus quality. Now, what do I mean when I say that? There's certainly a segment of the consumer market who never ever drinks the same thing twice, and they just want to walk into the store or the bar and say, what have I not had before? And they'll drink one and they'll say that was really good or that was really terrible or whatever, and then they go on to something else. And that's part of that's the consumer who's made these seltzers, etc., so hot. But that's a really challenging consumer. So the way the industry is going to stay relevant, I think, in the long term is focusing on what I call quality. Now, there's subjective quality, which means, gee, I like vanilla ice cream. I don't like chocolate ice cream. So therefore, chocolate ice cream is bad. Or there is what I call professional quality, which is I made it, you bought it, you liked it. If you go into the store and never want to buy it again, it better be the goddamn same.
Mm-hmm.
And that focus on what I call professional quality, which requires investment in quality controls and lab equipment and all the rest of that stuff. That's really where I think the long term of the industry as an industry is going and needs to go. Part of the problem with the 5,000 guys who've opened up in the last 5 years is that kind of quality is expensive, and very few of them can afford to make the investments in that sort of infrastructure. So that concerns me, because I don't need people getting bad beer from somewhere and getting turned off to the category. But I still think that over time, as things mature, the industry is. You're right. I think we're in our late adolescence, but as we get into our early 20s, to use your metaphor, I think that the focus is going to have to become more and more on quality.
I imagine you've been reflecting over the last quarter century of this brewing venture. I'm curious as to what you wish you knew now that you would have known back then, or I guess.
I mean, what I wish I'd known then.
Yes.
I now know.
Yes, or vice versa. But yeah. Sorry, it's still early apparently, coming off of a holiday weekend.
Yes, that's a good question. I think um, when we fired this thing up 25 years ago, I originally was in the brew pub segment. So that was a direct retail segment. And then when I opened up this production facility, my understanding of distribution and retail and chain grocery and all of that was totally minuscule. So that's taken me years to sort of get my head wrapped around that. So if I'd had that information, if I'd understood the go-to-market complexities, 25 years ago, it probably would have made my life significantly easier. The other thing to keep in mind too is um, getting back to access to market is, so in the beginning there were wine and spirits wholesalers, and there were Anheuser-Busch wholesalers and Miller Coors wholesalers, and that was about your only options.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a guy working for me a couple of years back who took over in a sales director role, and he looked at our distribution network and said, "Well, geez, in Virginia, you got an AB guy, you got an independent wine guy, you've got a Miller Coors guy over here. This is a really jumble." And he said, "Why did you set up that way as opposed to going all AB or all Miller Coors or all, independent craft, and the point was, and again, if you put this in the context of the 90s, I told them we went with the distributors who said yes.
Right.
Because they didn't always say yes. And sometimes those relationships didn't work. So it was just one of those things where if you'd known then that it's much better if you're sort of in a united network, i.e., all AB or all Miller Coors or whatever, you can get access to certain parts of the market much easier. So that's part of the reason why, when Sam Adams acquired Dogfish, one of the things that's happened in the last 2 years is they've tried to merge them all into the same network.
Right.
So
I'm curious, distribution aside and some of the business aside, when you first started, what do you think was the biggest challenge you faced?
Well, when we first started 25 years ago, the biggest challenge that we faced was, we're opening this brand new brewery with equipment that my brewmaster nor I nor anybody on my team had ever run, making products and recipes that none of us had ever made before, going into a distribution system that none of us had any even remote knowledge of, going into retail. And then, it was so early on in the industry as a whole that you're completely flying blind. Some of the early beer that we made, frankly, wasn't very good, or it didn't have any shelf stability because we didn't know anything about oxygen levels in packaged beers. So, I think the initial opening, the greatest challenge was trying to make sure we had good product to sell. Now, I had a fair amount of experience on the brewpub side, so we were able to get our arms around that reasonably quickly. But yeah, it was a great challenge, and I just remember being incredibly frustrated because when the beer I was making in the brewpub was really good,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't have the challenges because the beer in your brewpub never leaves your control. Well, virtually everything that I was making when we opened the brewery was leaving my control, and those were variables that I didn't understand at the time.
What do you think is the biggest challenge you're facing now?
That we're facing now?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's and has to do specifically with just the explosion of the number of breweries is SKU management. I mean, the distributors went through a period probably in the 2010 to 2015 where they were incredibly promiscuous. So if you made it, they bought it. And then they'd go out and try to sell it. And then after a couple of years of that, the wholesalers uh, looked up and said, "My God, I'm throwing away a whole lot of out of code beer here." Um, so the distributors immediately, and this was right about 5 years ago now, I think, when pumpkin beer took its first great dump in the market.
Yeah.
And there were thousands and thousands and thousands of cases of pumpkin ale, and everything kind of came to a screeching halt. The distributors began to sit there and say, I only want your 4 products.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm shipping to from Baltimore to Georgia, I get that. But if I'm shipping from Baltimore to another distributor in Maryland or even Pennsylvania or an adjacent territory, Virginia, I need you to take more than 4 SKUs, because I need that broad base to build my brand. So the distributor rationalization on SKUs certainly is one of the key challenges that we face right now. Second challenge that we face right now is a whole lot of these really small players are choosing to sell direct and bypassing a wholesaler. And while I commend them for their efforts, um, they're running in and out of accounts, and they're cutting deals left, right, and center. And we're going through a traditional wholesale market, which means that the prices are typically published, and that's what you sell for. So um, it's just market dynamics. I'm not casting aspersions anywhere.
Yeah.
It's the market.
Back with you in a flash, but I wanted to offer a quick word of thanks to this episode's sponsor, Cigar City Brewing, makers of Florida Man. It's a modern double IPA with a tropical expression from a blend of American hops, including Citra, Azacca, El Dorado, and Mandarina Bavarian. It's balanced by delicate peach esters from a unique double IPA yeast and a dash of Canadian honey malt. You can learn more at cigarcitybrewing.com. You brought up something interesting, though, of pumpkin beers 5 years ago, because if you go back, let's say 7-8 years ago,
right,
people started paying attention to Southern Tier was killing it, Dogfish was killing it, I think Buffalo Bill was, and so everybody said, oh my gosh, like I want a piece of that pie. I didn't, it's an unintended pun, but I want a piece of that, and so the market was flooded with it. And then I think we've seen it with other styles over the last couple of years, and then certainly with hard seltzer, of a lot of folks rushing hard seltzer into the market to try to compete with White Claw and Truly and all of those. And I think on a small level, a taproom only model, it makes sense for breweries to offer that because it's in the consumer consciousness. But I'm curious as to your thoughts on when to chase a fad, or when to sort of stand your own ground, or to stake out your own path.
Well, it's always better if you stake out your own path, because then other people are trying to, if it's successful, other people are trying to follow you. That's hard to do. Because I'm a relatively creative person, but I got to admit, there have been a lot of times over the last 25 years when I look up and see what somebody's doing and go, that was a brilliant damn idea. Why the hell didn't I think of that? But for every one of those, there's probably 10 quote unquote brilliant ideas that just completely tanked.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you can create your own thing as opposed to chasing a concept, I think that's ultimately better. And I think those companies who do that more and more consistently, which is really hard, they're the ones who I think sort of really emerge as the thought leaders. If you're going to chase a concept, then you have to be able to act fast, because I don't know how long hazy IPAs are going to be in the market, but it appears as though they're here to stay. But ask me 12 months from now, and maybe that's a whole different animal.
Sure. Well, I mean, you were talking earlier on how so many of the 5,000 breweries that have opened up in the last couple of years are in this taproom model. I mean, that's where hazy really excels.
Yeah, and a lot of that originated because they didn't have any way to filter the beer.
Ken Grossman has made the joke a couple of times that his beer was never filtered because they couldn't afford one in the early days, but
Right.
they still let it
Right.
drop clear. Um, One of the things that I've always liked about your brewery, and that we've talked about in previous occasions, though, is a shared respect and love for cask ale.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a while you were working hard to bring that to the people, to sort of make it an American staple.
Yep.
And it just doesn't work here. It just doesn't work in this country for some reason. And
Unfortunately, it's very challenging, and I mean, it went from being something that we had a major focus on to being sort of, it's not an afterthought. We still take great pride in the small number of casks that we do, but the problem with this country vis-a-vis cask ale is it's cultural. Um, Cask beer requires a willingness on the part of the publican or the bar owner to handle the product correctly, and dispense correctly, and do what you can do to not have the product go off. And just very few bar owners either understand that or are willing to undertake that kind of level of um, of maintenance. And so I think there was a lot of bar owners initially who said, "Yeah, well, I'll take one of them," and then they just threw it on top of the bar, and there's no refrigeration. They're just pumping air into the cask as they're dispensing the product. And when the product goes off 2.5 days later, because they didn't sell it all in one night like they hoped they would, um, then the beer was awful.
yeah,
So, and I think the bar owners get tired of throwing away a half a barrel, and the consumers got tired of having not very good beer. So what's happened, I think, is that there has emerged a very small number of highly dedicated publicans who want to do this and do it correctly. And then there's guys like me who are trying to find out who they are so that we can continue to do this labor of love, because I still think that's draft beer in its absolute best um, presentation.
hmm
And we just accept that fact that, sometimes you just don't always get what you want.
it's one of those things where it would just be lovely if more places did it right or took care with it. But I also remember it must have been 5 years now, where brewers were starting to get just silly with it as well,
Yeah.
and they were shoving gummy worms and things, or
Yep.
here's our cask ale Berliner Weiss, or what, and it wasn't. I don't know. I think when the consumers were going through that big change 5 years ago, and we really started to see this accelerated growth, there wasn't a fundamental education that took place for a lot of
Well,
beer
well,
drinkers.
well. Here. I mean, here's part of.
I sound like an old man when I'm saying that, but yeah.
No, but I mean, look. We're 25 years in this company, and I've been doing this for 30 years. So there's a certain amount of historical perspective, and things run in cycles. Um, but but here's part of what occurred in the last 5 to 7 years. Um, So you've got guys like me that have been around for a long time who have established a flagship IPA or a flagship pale ale or whatever. And you're opening in my market. And you start to brew beer. Well, you're going to have a problem because your IPA is already overshadowed by my IPA, if you know what I'm saying from a
Mm-hmm.
conceptual standpoint.
Yeah.
So you got to do something different to get noticed, which then led to a lot of products getting, double peanut porter, triple hopped, jalapeno uh, porters, you
Line
know.
forms to the left. Yeah.
Right, and so that has occurred, and uh, the interesting thing was, as I alluded to earlier, is that wholesalers were very promiscuous. They'd buy it, and the consumer would buy it, but they only bought it once, except with some notable exceptions. Um, so I think things run in cycles. So it went a little bit to the wacko side, And I'm thinking, and we touched on this a little bit earlier about we're seeing sort of the reemergence of flagship products,
Hmm.
partly. So I think the pendulum is now beginning to swing back a little bit the other way, and we'll see over time whether that's indeed the case. But I mean, I watched the market do what it did in the 90s, the late 90s, and we're seeing that pattern repeating itself again, somewhat exacerbated by COVID. Um, and I think that in another 5 years we're going to see a different cycle. And that's one of the things that's so interesting and fascinating as well as terrifying, um, about dealing in the consumer products segment, which is why you have to be willing to reinvent yourself, is because it's it's never the same.
Yeah.
As soon as you think you've just invented the greatest thing since sliced bread, nobody wants to eat bread.
Well, it's sort of like brewed IPA. It didn't even have a
Right.
chance to take off. We talked about that
Right.
on a previous show. I'm curious to hear your take on this, especially with cycles. So, your 25th anniversary beer, simply called 25, is going to be a
Uh-huh.
double barrel aged strong ale. With, I guess it's two different barrels that are in there, and
Yeah.
it's sort of
Bourbon barrel and then rye barrel.
a barley wine like English inspired strong ale is what it's described as in this press release that came, and it's going to be for sale in 16-ounce 4-packs.
Yep.
So I have previous anniversary bottles of yours sitting in my cellar, and bottles is the operative word, and they're all in 22s.
Right.
Will 22s ever make a comeback?
I don't think so. The
That was
22
a deep
ounce.
sigh. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I kind of liked them, but I mean, 22s beginning about 6 years ago just were laying eggs on the shelf. Um, and uh, and again, I think part of it with the explosion of all the newer breweries, it was much cheaper to put product in a can format than it was in a bottling format, because none of them owned bottling lines, but you could get these mobile canning services. Um, so I think that's what drove that, and just with everybody putting out everything they could possibly think of to put out, that's what's driven that 4-pack 16-ounce can, and I think that absolutely killed the 22, um, which is kind of a shame. I actually have 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24, although 24 was in cans, sitting on a shelf behind me. And once I haven't picked up my 25 yet. Um, uh, I'm going to make a weekend of just trying to get through all 5 of those. But they're strong beers, so it'll take me pretty much the whole weekend.
That's yeah. You might want to make that like a long holiday weekend with vacation day built in on the back end of it.
You're probably correct.
It's you unintentionally set me up for a pretty good segue here. When you're
Mm-hmm.
not brewing or hanging out at your brewery, as it were, you are talking about wine and reviewing wine and writing about wine for your local NPR station.
Right.
And you had a piece up recently on aging wine that I
Uh-huh.
really enjoyed listening to, because I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of folks who were saying, okay, I'm going to go through my cellar and I'm going to empty out all this stuff. And about a week or so into it, there's a lot of private conversations that were happening on back channels where it's like, boy, I let a lot of things sit for too long, and I'm dumping a lot of beer that I should have drank fresh, or however it was. And you just wrote the same thing about wine recently as
Yep.
well, or
Yep.
talked about it, I should say, on
Mm-hmm.
on this segment. Um, how much does your love, appreciation, understanding of wine play into your beer side, and vice versa?
I think they're completely complementary. I mean,
Because they do seem siloed at times, like even still out in the world today, and I'm working at Wine Enthusiast as a contributing editor, and it
mm-hmm.
seems like a lot of times the coverage is still in silos, and for even for drinkers, as much as we talk about cross drinkers, there's still people who are very much in their beverage lane.
Well, see, there's a book project that I hope to get to, and maybe we can do this together. There's a book project that I hope to get to when I ever, if ever, I begin to cut back a little bit, which I want to call The Wine Lover's Guide to Beer. And I think that you can explore some, so what is the beer quote unquote equivalent of a Chardonnay or a Syrah or and I just think that there's some things where we could build cross references to help merge these consumer bases, understanding of course the demographic differences, because beer consumption clearly is younger demographic and wine consumption is a lot more older demographic. But I also think, well, I agree with you that there's a little bit of a silo factor there. I just personally think that, my love and passion for beer has improved my ability to appreciate good wine and vice versa. So it's to me, it all comes down to when you're buying good wine or you're buying good beer, what you're ultimately paying for is complexity of flavor profile. And that's interesting because it gives you something to do other than slake your thirst.
Yeah.
And I think both of those beverages, and you can say the same thing for for good spirits as well. It's just it adds another dimension to life that I think can add pleasure other than the alcoholic kick. That I'm sorry, but you only go around once. I'm gonna grab the gusto per se.
Do you find I know it's not two sides of your brain, but I guess the areas that are wine focused versus the area that are beer focused, do you find yourself merging the two when it comes to either your writing or what you want to experiment on innovation wise with what eventually goes into a bottle or a can?
Gosh, I don't really know. I mean, I use a lot of the same uh, you know, skills when I'm trying to taste products and see whether it's wine or beer or whatever, what seems to be working. Um, I think that uh, I think that wine, the structure of wine, from the acidity and the fruit characters and the aromatics, um, all of those skills apply to beer, but that the beer drinker tends to not think of that way. So I think that in some respects, my appreciation of wine has improved my ability to look at beer from at least a subjective, qualitative approach. Uh, I mean, I encourage, if you consume alcoholic beverages, I encourage people to try lots of things, and also understand that over time your palate and your interests will change. So there are certainly beers that I didn't have a lot of respect for years ago that I've now really come to have a lot more respect for. So,
What's a good example of that?
Um, well, I mean, in the early age of craft beer uh, in the really early '90s, maybe slightly late '80s, you know, if you were an American brewer or American quote unquote beer geek, I mean, it was all about aromatic hops um, and pale ales with the roasty malt character and all the rest of that stuff. Um, and I've gotten to the point now where I like all those, but and I still like a good IPA, but I've just got a much greater appreciation for just a classic Pilsner
Yeah.
because it's just a good drink. So here's a funny story for you. Um, I guess about a year and a half ago, um, I was doing an in-store sampling, and I get a phone call from the guy who's the executive director for our local Brewers Association.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Brewers Association function that was taking place that day, but I hadn't planned on being there because I was doing this store sampling. And he called me up and said, "Are you going to I forget what the name of the event was?" And I said, "No, Kevin, I'm doing this." And he says, "You should be there." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Just be there." Well, that was when they were going to announce the Maryland Brewers Association awards for beer for the year. And so I show up, and our Pilsner gets the best in show.
Oh.
Now, I was flabbergasted, because in the era of triple jalapeno peanut butter chocolate porter, how does a goddamn Pilsner get the best in show? And I think that kind of underscores what I was saying before, is that sometimes people just want a good beer. So.
You still do in-store tasting, or back when in-store tastings were a thing?
Oh yeah, I'm a big believer in it. I mean, I do. I probably do, when you can do them again, at least 2 a month. And I get people coming to me sometimes and say, "Why are you doing that?"
Well, that's
says,
yeah.
It's two couple of reasons. One, I think, and obviously I'm going to be focusing them more on key retailers, but I think it makes an impression on a key retailer that I'm still out there getting dirt under my fingernails. And secondly, and this is I think really for me, where the rubber meets the road, is if I'm standing in a store handing out samples, I get to watch what people are buying. And you will understand where the market's going a whole lot better if you stand in a retail place and watch what they're buying than anything you can read in the trades.
I don't disagree with that.
So I get value out of it. Plus, in fact, I get some good joke material from time to time.
I want to bring this back to where we started.
Okay.
With the tap room, and it's been closed now for a couple months.
Yeah.
I know you're a forward-looking guy. There's a vaccine or a couple on the horizon. There's hope that things will get back to how they were for a lot of us. Do you think your in-person experience is going to be different post-COVID? Do you think the
I'm
tap
not sure
room
I know exactly what you mean.
will the tap room be? Do you feel like it'll be different going forward? Are you thinking about making adjustments? Are you thinking about
we already had plans on doing some things, doing some work in the tap room to make the space a little more comfortable and a little more user friendly per se. So we're going to continue to do those developments. I just personally think that, I think we touched on this earlier. There's a huge amount, I believe, of pent-up demand. People are just so sick and tired of being told, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. You shouldn't do this. And they're so sick and tired of being afraid that I think, once the gloves come off, I think there's a whole lot of people who just want to get back together. And I do believe that if you're a beer fan, brewery tap rooms, there's something wonderfully authentic about it. Here I am right now where they make this product that I'm drinking right in front of me.
Yeah.
And whether it's, a super pretty tap room, the Guinness guys around the corner from us are killing it. But it's almost like Disneyland, and I say that with all due respect. And
it's
I like
impressive.
those folks,
yeah,
it's extremely impressive. But then we have people who then come, because we're a mile and a quarter away, who then come over and see us and say, "That's impressive. I will go there again. But when I come here, it's authentic."
Interesting.
And it's like I said, it's not a dig on anybody. It's just ours is a little bit more, lower scale. And, you see us, warts and all.
Well, I will say your 25th anniversary is going to be marked by a live Facebook Q&A with yourself and Jim McGreevy, who's the president and CEO of the Beer Institute. That's happening at 5 o'clock Eastern on the 4th, which
Friday.
I think is Thursday or Friday?
Friday.
Friday of this week. And then I imagine there'll be a replay on your Facebook page afterwards for folks who listen to this after that happened. But Hugh, thanks for your insight. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for 25 years of memories.
Hell, John, it's always a pleasure. You know that. I look forward to seeing you again live and in person one of these days soon.
Same here. That's Hugh Sisson of Heavy Seas Brewing. If you live in the distribution footprint of the brewery, head out this week and safely pick up a 6-pack to toast their milestone. The beer is a great reward. And a bit of housekeeping. Make sure to head over to Facebook and join the This Week in Rausch Beer group. There's always something smoky going on. And if beer audio is your thing, make sure you listen to the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch for deep dive conversations with interesting brewery owners and more. And also, head over to beeredge.com for articles and to sign up for our newsletter. Every Monday, look for new episodes of Steal This Beer, and once a month, you should download the BYO Nano podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe to this show and to leave a review. You can always reach me via email at John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or you can find me on Twitter at John_Holl. Nate Schweber does the music. He's got a new album out called Gaps, and you can find him at nateschweber.bandcamp.com. Jeff Quinn designed our logo. All right, before we go, and as promised, Sean Sasser, he is the director of brewing for Cigar City Brewing Company, which is this episode's sponsor. He's back with me on the phone, and we're talking about Florida Man, the double IPA from the brewery. And Sean, the beer has evolved since it was first released, and I'd love to hear a little bit about what it was and what it's become that we can all now drink and enjoy today.
Well, just like Florida Man himself, it's gone through a lot of changes and kind of adapted with the times. And so early on in its days, it was more of a West Coast style double IPA, a lot maltier, a lot more bitter, with more of a grassy kush note to it. Now it's a bit more in between a hazy and a West Coast double IPA. So a lot more mango, a lot more tropical, a lot more citrus, a little bit less bitterness, but still enough to let you know it's a double IPA.
Hit us with the stats on this beer.
It's 8.5% alcohol by volume and 50 IBUs.
Awesome. And it's available where Cigar City beers are available. If you want to know more about Florida Man and all of the other Cigar City Brewing beers, you can check out cigarcitybrewing.com. Sean, thanks for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm John Holl. New episodes of this show reliably drop every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.